Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation with Ruth Waring, who has joined us today to have a chat about careers, about transport, wellbeing, and compliance. Ruth is a transport and compliance consultant at RW Consulting and has had a really interesting career in the industry. And we're recording this for the CILT Next Generation Forum, which aims to help young and new professionals in the industry, as well as look at forward-thinking, innovative ideas for where the industry is going. So, Ruth, I will kick it off with your career history, if that's okay. Talk to me about why you chose to go into logistics.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, I'm a very unusual person in logistics because I did not fall into it. I chose to go into logistics, which is particularly unlikely as I did that in 1988. So I had a holiday job when I was at university in Edinburgh. I was doing business studies, and I had a brilliant holiday job being a courier for a coach company. And what that meant was that I organised coach trips for old people who were staying on a little holiday village in Chester. And I just loved it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to work with drivers. I want to organise things. I just kind of got the bug for logistics. So when I went back to university for my final year, I applied for jobs working in logistics and transport. And I got a job with what's now DHL, and became a graduate trainee for them. So I actually chose to go into logistics.
Brilliant. And so you really liked the people and the organisation side of that then?
Yeah, I love the vibe of dealing with the drivers. I liked the idea that you could make money. So depending on which trips I organised, I could make more money, or I was sort of in control of my profit as a 21-year-old, which was quite a big deal. And I just loved the whole kind of buzz of different things every day. And I just thought this is what I need to go into, and haven't really ever looked back. So it was definitely the right choice.
Yeah, because I think that's really interesting. And it must have been an interesting time to come into logistics in 1988.
It was actually 89. So I had the job in 88, but I graduated in 89.
Okay, yeah. And so how do you think, it must have changed a lot within your career. And how have you found that?
I was actually incredibly fortunate. I started working for a company called XL Logistics Fashion Flow, and they were part of the Marks and Spencer supply chain at that time. And on my very first day as a graduate trainee going into Coventry Depot, because you went around different depots, and they said, come in at 9 o'clock and Sarah will sort you out. And I thought, right, okay, who's Sarah? And when I got there, Sarah turned out to be the female transport manager. And she was only a year older than me. And she had basically sort of said, she was an admin assistant, and she said, I want to be a transport manager. So they put her through her transport manager's CPC. And so there were 4 transport managers. There was an Asian guy, a white guy, and 2 women, which was probably very unusual back in 1989. And it just meant that I wasn't the only one. And she was just, she was a normal person. She wasn't sort of anything. She was just an incredibly driven, normal person. And I thought, well, if she can do it, I've got a degree, I can do it. And so it made my sort of journey a little bit easier because the path had already been trodden. And I talk about the trodden path quite a lot because it's so important that you feel that you're not having to hack down the weeds and the brambles. If somebody else has trodden that path before you, they've made a pathway for you to walk. And so I was very fortunate, and I'm still friends with her today. And she's now a grandmother, and she's just the most incredible person. But she was the sort of the prototype woman in logistics. So that was my my sort of very fortunate start to life. So although it's changed a lot in that time, I was very lucky to have that touch point very early on of having a female role model. In terms of the way that the industry's developed, I think there's obviously a lot more women come in now, but in some ways the problems and the challenges that women face have become more difficult. because as there are more women, it becomes easier for people to say things like, oh, well, we had a female driver or we had a female traffic manager, but she was rubbish. And they always remember them. And then you think, yeah, but how many rubbish male drivers have you had that just get completely forgotten? And that's the problem, is sometimes the more that it's the more that people start to come through the ranks, even if one person's not very good, they're kind of, the whole of that race is somehow not very good. And it's, that can be very difficult. So sometimes you sort of feel that you're having to argue that, just because one person came in, worked there for 2 years and then got pregnant, doesn't mean that everybody's going to do that. And anyway, that's how the human race survives. So all of those sort of things, it's changed a lot, but certainly in haulage, which is the world that I tend to live in, it's still quite old-fashioned. And what I find really interesting is even the younger people tend to be quite old-fashioned. Even if they're young. So if you're working for a small family haulage business, it's probably going to be the son of the person or the grandson of the person who started it. And they may be just as prejudiced or just as old-fashioned in the way that they think as their grandfather was. So, it doesn't necessarily mean because there are younger people coming through that everybody's going to change their mindset. It's very much a kind of small business mindset that women are cost money and women are difficult. And, we know what we're doing with a load of men. So it's quite hard to take on a woman because she's not going to fit the pattern that we know. And therefore, she's going to be harder work, without actually realising that the harder work bit of it is what breaks groupthink and actually makes businesses a lot more profitable, and actually adds that diversity and inclusion to the way that businesses make decisions. And it is harder work in the short term, but actually it is hugely beneficial for profitability in the longer term. And that's the journey that I think a lot of small businesses, particularly in transport, are yet to go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it must be so difficult for the people who are coming through and, as you said, hacking the weeds, and then also having to essentially represent their entire gender.
Yeah,
and your
exactly.
performance has, 1,000 people on the back of you who, if you fail, may never get the opportunity to try.
Yeah, that is a difficult mantle to carry. Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to get away from that idea that because we had one woman, where maybe we had 3 women and one of them was rubbish, that it is very difficult to break that mindset. And the number of people that have said to me, oh, we had one female driver and she only lasted a week, or we had one female driver and she couldn't reverse. And you're just like, come on, folks, women are half the population. We are not a minority. And just because one person didn't work out, or you've remembered the one person that didn't work out, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to fall into that particular category. And that's the problem that we're at the moment, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you co-founded the Women in Logistics Forum in 2008. Yep. What's the change that you've been able to push through? Like, how do you think that this has contributed to the sector?
So I think the Women in Logistics strapline is connect, engage, inspire, and that's really what we have done and we continue to do. So Claire Bottle and I set up Women in Logistics UK in 2008, to say 15 and a half years ago now, and really that was born of our own personal frustrations with the profession, but also really wanting to make a change. So the old thing, you can't be what you can't see, or make the change that you want to be. And we just thought, well, rather than sitting around kind of saying how awful it is, let's do something about it. So I'd had a particularly bad experience at one of my employers when I was, off childbearing years, and had a particularly awful personal experience. And I just thought, I don't want that to happen to anyone else. And I really want to feel that I have left this industry in a better place than than when I came into it. And so Claire and I met, and those of you who've met both Claire and I will know we're very similar characters. Many people don't seem to know that we're two separate people, but she and I just really got on so well, and we thought, well, we're going to do this. So I think the big thing is that there's now somewhere for women to congregate, whether it's online or in real life, to feel. When we did a survey in the early days, somebody said that being within women logistics was like having a warm blanket, a warm comfort blanket, you know, to feel that you are part of something. And I remember, you know, apart from the luck of having Sarah when I started in my job, I remember working nights and being the only woman in the building and just feel incredibly isolated and really quite sad. You know, I'd left university with all these amazing female friends, and suddenly I was just kind of the only woman, and my sense of humor, my personality was being almost crushed by being, you know, this very isolated person. And I just wanted to be able to be myself. I wanted to be able to speak with my authentic voice and not be worried about that. And Claire and I just sort of had this vision, and we said, right, we're going to do it. And the big thing that helped us was LinkedIn. And in 2008, LinkedIn was at the tipping point between, you know, kind of, I think it got to 1 million people. And that was the point at which it went, you know, right, this is going to work. So we thought, well, if we do it on LinkedIn, we don't have to have any money. No one can stop us, because, you know, that, frankly, that was a risk that someone was going to try and stop us. And we just thought, right, you know, we're just going to do it. And I think we were both old enough to not worry about the consequences of doing it, because previous to that, I'd had the idea. In fact, I had the idea in 1989 to do it, but it was almost impossible. And then I had the idea again in the early 90s, was warned off. You know, so by that point in 2008, we were both like, look, you know, we're just going to have to do this. And the kind of the mood music had changed enough for us to feel that we could do it. So we did it, got on LinkedIn, got the group off the ground, and we had our first meeting in January 2009. And then really from there, it went on. It wasn't a forum originally within CILT, it was a separate group. And we just, you know, kind of developed the idea of the networking events, the warehouse visits, personal professional networking, and again, building on this idea of connect, engage, inspire. And so I feel really now what the legacy of women in logistics, which is a living legacy, it continues, is that the women coming into the industry now, such as you and your colleagues, have got people that they can look up to, that you've got role models, that you can see women that have really succeeded, and not necessarily women that have succeeded going the obvious corporate route. You know, I'm a consultant, I've chosen consultancy, and Claire's the CEO of the UK Warehousing Association, and there's lots of examples of women that have done amazing things but haven't necessarily just gone up the obvious corporate ladder. And I think that's another way of showing women who maybe do want to have a career alongside caring responsibilities, that actually this is not, you don't have to go the obvious way, that your path can be a path that you've chosen, but it's actually not quite so brambly. And that's another way that I feel that we have shown women and younger people generally that this is an industry that is suitable for women. In fact, there's lots of reasons why women should go into logistics. I mean, I'm going back to do a talk at my old school soon, and one of the things that I was really good at school was French and German. And of course, you know, I still speak fluent French, and it's really interesting, you know, occasionally I will suddenly need to speak French. You know, when we went through the Brexit stuff, I was working for a company and we did a load of custom stuff, and I, you know, was being woken up by lorry drivers at 6:30 in the morning saying, Ruth, can you speak to this customs bloke because we've got a problem? Or I've been stopped by the gendarme on the auto route, can you speak to him? And, you know, having those language skills is really huge in logistics. But also, I know this is a bit of an old, you know, it's a cliche, but multitasking, you know, that's what logistics is all about. And, you know, the idea of, particularly for the we were talking about next generation, doesn't just mean young people. But if we've got anybody watching this who's maybe a mum returning to work after having kids, or a dad returning to work after having kids, you know, those skills are massively transferable. And I remember the other way around, thinking when I had my son when he was a baby, the only reason I was prepared for what lay ahead was the fact that I'd worked in logistics. I was really organised, and I remember thinking, right, if we need to go out at 2 o'clock, we're going to have to start at 1:30, and we need to do this, this, and this in order to get him in the buggy, you know, with the right nappy and fed at 2 o'clock. And it's almost like you can do that in reverse, going back into the world of work, because the skills and the organizational stuff that you've got, you can, you know, having a mother load in your head is actually great preparation for a career in logistics. So I think, is just to go back to the question, it's really to have those examples that are out there and that are proud of what they have achieved. You know, Claire and I and all of the committee are out there as role models, and we want to be recognised as role models, and we're not ashamed or hiding away. You know, we're saying, actually, we've done all this really good stuff, and, you know, we want to be inspiring the next generation. And there is a quote, and it's Madeline somebody, whether it's like, allow your light to shine so that others you give others permission for their light to shine. And that's really what we are trying to do.
I think it is so important to not only be allowed to be a woman in the industry, but allowed to be a woman in the industry. And I find that that's something that I think about a fair bit, about how I can be absolutely myself and be good at my job and make a valuable contribution and have that recognized, even though the way I do things, the way I think about things, the way that I react to things might be different. I mean, logistics is a stressful place, but it can be. It's not always. Don't be put off, people who are watching. But, you know, the way that I react, I cry a fair bit. That's my stress, the way I react to that. And I'm not ashamed of that. You know, I'm not going to do it in the middle of a meeting. And there's a way to be professional, but, you know, the way that we react to things, or the way that we think things through, or the experiences that we have in our life inform the decisions and the ideas that we have at work. And being able to be your authentic self at work will bring new ideas to the table, will change the dynamic in an industry that hasn't changed that much culture-wise in a long time, and will help make people, whatever gender they are, be able to be more comfortable in their place of work, which I think is really important if people want to have long, fruitful, successful careers. And if you as a company want your staff to have long, fruitful, successful careers.
Yeah, I think the wording or the phrase to use is psychological safety. And I mean, I do quite a lot of health and safety training, and I was researching this yesterday for updating a health and safety course that I run. And it's so important that everybody within an organisation feels psychologically safe to state their ideas, as you say, to maybe object something. You know, one of the biggest risks to business is groupthink, and everybody just going along with the prevailing idea, you know, of taking risks or testosterone fueled decision making. And there are so many examples in history where men, and I use the word deliberately, men have made decisions that are highly risky and that have been disastrous because nobody in the organisation felt psychologically safe to challenge that decision. And I think that's why it's so important that there are women working in logistics, and, you know, that we are actually having that voice at the table, and, as you say, being our authentic selves. Because I know when I started, I made the very deliberate decision to kind of tone myself down. You know, I knew that I had to do that because I just wasn't going to get on being me. You know, it was just too Ruthy. Whereas now, as you said before we started recording, you know, that Ruthiness is what inspires people. So you really shouldn't have to tone it down. And that's really the kind of gift that I hope I've given to logistics, is that you can be yourself, as you know, Claire and the rest of the committee will say. You know, you can wear a brightly coloured jacket, and you can have kind of slightly weird earrings on, and no one's going to say because of that she doesn't know what she's talking about. You know, I still know the ins and outs of driver's hours. You know, it does, the two are not mutually exclusive, and I think that's the big thing, is just to sort of bring this in as normal, that, you know, we can be ourselves, and ourselves isn't, you know, we, as you said earlier, we shouldn't have to explain or be ashamed of that. We should just say this is what we're bringing to the party, and actually it's hugely useful. And I want to really stress the fact that it's useful from a profitability point of view, not just a pink and fluffy point of view, because actually that's the bit that, you know, the men will pay attention to.
And I mean, moving on to what is often thought of as pink and fluffy sometimes, and kind of touches on this being comfortable psychological safety at work. This is a really unique industry in its safety aspects, in its 24/7 aspects, the different types of jobs that you have, the pressure of just-in-time delivery and supply chains. How does, I mean, throughout your career, it probably has changed a bit, but it's also something that you advise on now. How does mental health fit into that?
Well, I think it's really important that companies in the logistics profession do get a real grip on mental health. And it's one of my biggest frustrations, because it seems to be one of the last bastions. Even the companies that kind of say the right thing in most equality and diversity, you know, kind of ways, will still hold back and not want to embrace mental health at work, or good mental health at work. And I think it's, you know, one of the biggest frustrations is, if you think about the role of the transport or the traffic manager, you know, that role is incredibly stressful. And I've seen so many people, men in the main, who have aged before their time, who have been heavy smokers, certainly, because often they felt that smoking was the only chance that they would get to have a break. So yeah, they would go out for a cigarette because that would give them a small break. Sometimes, you know, relying on alcohol as well. And you do find that this is this kind of generation. And as I said before, it doesn't even mean that they're older. That, you know, some of the younger people are getting into that habit as well, because it's so full on and it's adrenaline junkie stuff. But it has got a very, you know, it's got a long-term effect on people's mental health. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies, particularly in transport, don't recognise that until it's too late. And then they'll say, oh, well, you know, you need to have some time off sick, or, you know, we'll find somebody to help you. But actually, that could have all been prevented if 6 months earlier the warning signs had been seen by either by colleagues or a mental health first aider. So I think having mental health first aiders is a really good precautionary measure for people to take. And, you know, I know it's kind of a big thing now that, you know, we talk a lot about male suicides and it being the biggest killer of men under 45. But I think as an industry, as a profession, logistics hasn't really embraced that. And I saw a video yesterday about construction, mental health in construction, and how it's a, you know, it's a big killer of because it's such a macho industry. And I think that's exactly the same with logistics, particularly within haulage. And so, you know, as a cry to the industry, sort of call to arms, I would say, please look at your health and safety policy from a mental health perspective. And, you know, don't forget about stress, because a lot of your, if you actually analyse your time off, a lot of it will ultimately be down to stress. And I think that's part of the solution, that people haven't yet had that sort of mindset to get to, is actually, if we can prevent these problems, we can actually, again, affect our profitability in the long term. But there's still this kind of macho, oh, you know, just keep your head down, keep, you know. And I do driver CPC training, and you know, one of the elements I do in that, we have a whole section about driver well-being, and we talk about mental health in that. And they always say at the end, you know, it's really good to just be able to talk about it, because it's not something that drivers are allowed to talk about. So I think that is a big win that this industry is yet to kind of really embrace properly, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a few conversations recently, specifically with drivers, about the effect of the job on mental health, whether that be the long and often unsocial hours, whether that be the time spent on their own,
Being away from
the
home. Yeah.
yeah, the responsibility of driving a
Yeah.
lorry in the public space. Um, it is a lot. And I think you're right. It's not something that we talk about enough as an industry. And it's not something where there are really clear best practices around. You know,
Yes.
everybody
Yeah.
knows about high vis. Everybody knows about steel toe cap boots.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And not everybody knows the best practice of mental health in an industry like this, where it should be as obvious as don't get hit by a truck. This is what we put in place to stop that. Don't be affected by the stress and the loneliness and the pressure of the job. This is what we put to
Yes.
stop this.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we need to be looking at more. And I thought it was interesting. I attended the Women in Logistics conference in 2022, and we had a mental health professional as one of the speakers. And I think that was the first time that I'd really seen that at an industry event, where it was taken that seriously and where everybody in the room was able to learn from a professional and hopefully take back those ideas to their own companies. But yeah, it's definitely something that we need to be looking at, especially because the jobs vary quite a lot. So it's not really a one size fits all kind of thing. And it's not a 9 to 5 office job. And we're not in locations where companies can put, you know, goat yoga on at lunchtime.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like that. And there are things that we have to do to make, you know, the world go round logistically, whether that be have unusual break times, whether that be work unusual hours, work in a cold environment, work on our own. But it doesn't mean that mental health and well-being should be deprioritized in order for food to get on the table or for, you know, your Amazon order to arrive the next day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Jumping slightly back to what you said a few minutes ago, you were talking about how you and the other committee members of the Women in Logistics Forum were able to showcase that there can be, you know, a career isn't a typical ladder where you go from, you know, supervisor to shift manager to
Yeah.
next level to
Yeah.
next level. It can be really different. And I mean, you've spent a lot of your time in consultancy working for yourself, which is a big thing. But you've also worked for companies, established companies, haven't you? So
Yeah.
what have you learned from the different experiences?
I think I've learned a lot. I think I've learned that being self-employed is probably the best thing for me, simply because particularly in the area of expertise that I work in, which is transport compliance, it's easier to give somebody advice, which then it's up to them to take or leave, than it is to be the director of a company that's actually then that has to be part of that decision whether they take or leave it. So as a consultant, you sort of walk away, which is you know, a different dynamic really. But that's, you know, that's just one of the sort of pressures really of this sector. I think it's you know, I don't think I do office politics very well. I'm fairly sort of, you know, I kind of, well, I can do it, but it crushes my soul, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I worked for a French company for 7 years, and that was, although I spoke fluent French and I'd lived in France, so I had a very good understanding of the French psychology. I found that incredibly difficult because it's just so different to the way that British companies are run. They have a very autocratic management style. They have this idea of, you know, they have something called a cadre, which is an officer class. So if you're not cadre, you know, it's the sort of class-based system within the management, and I found that really hard to get my head round. And the vous and the tous, and who do you vous voir and who do you tutoir, and oh yeah, it was hard. So that was you know, that was tough. But I think I found that I I worked for a technology company for a year because when I sold my business, we'd built an app, and so we sold the app to a technology company, and that was a real eye opener because I had obviously only worked for logistics companies, and I didn't realise that there was different sorts of people out there who aren't like constantly getting stuff done, and they like talking about things and throwing ideas around, and I would just be in a meeting going with my pen poised, like with my pad going, so what do you want me to do by when? And they were like, no, we're just talking it through. I'm like, so you don't actually want me to do anything? No. And I just couldn't get my head around that. I am a doer, of the highest order. And so I think that was interesting, that there are different industries have different types of people. And I did work for a company for 2 years, which was a book publishing company. So I'd gone from a just-in-time environment where we had, we were going to break the we were going to miss the production slot at Peugeot Citroën in Coventry if we didn't get these parts, to the production line on time. And then now suddenly the next day I was working for a company saying, well, we've got the author in Waterstones in Bath, and she's waiting to sign her books, and the books haven't arrived. I'm like, right, okay, it's a bit different.
Yeah, absolutely.
£30,000 a minute if you break the production line chain. So I think that's what it's taught me, is that there are logistics touches so many different things, and there are so many different types of organization out there, and I think the great thing about logistics in terms of opportunities for women is you don't have to work for a 3PL, you don't have to work for a manufacturer, you can work for a retailer, you can be in supply chain, you can be in marketing, you can be in HR, you can be a lawyer. All of these things are still in logistics, and I think that's something that maybe people don't appreciate, is that you can be a lawyer working logistics. I know lots of lawyers who work on the road transport side of things, who've had incredible careers, representing companies at public inquiry, who've got operator licenses. That's a whole kind of genre that nobody would talk about at school. So I think that's really what those different experiences have taught me. But ultimately, I think I am best being a self-employed person.
I want to come back to that, but just for the meantime, in terms of changing companies, making the move to do your own thing, how have you found opportunities, especially in a world, I think, in your early career where you weren't necessarily going to be golf buddies with the guy who was hiring? So how have you moved around, and how have you made the decision that the next step is for you, and that's the right time for you?
The sort of the first time I moved was from DHL to Jeffco, and I had tried very hard to kind of get on within DHL, and they had this system where you could apply for jobs internally, but they would quite often not really be a job. They would have a preferred candidate. So I said to them, look, you need to start writing on these. There is a preferred candidate, because people are just wasting their time applying for these jobs. And that just seemed to be sum up the whole organisation. They spent huge amounts of money training me and 79 other people up to be the graduate trainees that year, and yet they were squandering these people, and loads of people left. So I think at that point I just thought, I need to be somewhere where I've got some sort of trajectory, and the French, speaking French was a big thing. I got a company car when I was 25, so that was a big deal. And then I think after that, it was a case of kind of staying somewhere until I felt that either it wasn't really right for me anymore, or it was making me ill. That was quite often the case. And when I left the next organisation, my husband at the time said to me, you've just got to get out. This is not working for you. And it was the stress. And, I had a particularly difficult, very autocratic boss, and it was just, I had a 3-year-old, and I ended up with sores all at my arms, with the stress. And I just thought, no, this is no good. So I started looking for the job, and was lucky enough to find this job, which was at a book distribution company with an amazing female boss. And I was there for 2 years, and after 18 months, I thought, I've always wanted to go self-employed. This is my sort of, my big thing. And I did something really brave, which was I approached her and said, I want to go self-employed, and but I want to work with you, and I want to sort of see how we can work this together. And she suggested that I did 2 days a week for 6 months to embed the new transport manager to enable him to do his CPC. And that was how I made that transition. But it was one of the bravest things I've ever done, was to have that conversation. But sometimes, you have to be brave. And if, I knew that that was my destiny to go self-employed, and I'd always wanted to do that, but I knew that, it would be very difficult. And again, I'm very good at planning. I'm in logistics. So I spoke to my husband at the time and said, I was the main breadwinner. And I said, I want to go self-employed, but this is how I did a PowerPoint presentation to him, actually, which was quite amusing because he wasn't that sort of person at all. And I just said, like, this is my plan. And I've got enough money for 6 months. If after 3 months I've got no work, I'll start looking for another job, and I speak fluent French and I can do this and I can do it. If the worst comes to the worst, I'll be a traffic manager, and I'll go down a few steps, and I will always have a job. And persuaded him that this was going to work. And it was a big jump, but I'm so thrilled that I did that, because it's hard to not wait till you're made redundant, because I thought, well, if I wait till I'm made redundant, I'll never be made redundant, So it was kind of a very brave thing to do, especially with a 3-year-old and being the main breadwinner, but it was the right thing to do. And then, when we were approached about buying the business, there was lots of big decisions, but my business partner at the time had a brilliant phrase, which was, you need to minimize maximum regret. So we decided that the maximum regret was that we didn't sell, and then we actually felt then we should have done, and so we decided to sell, and it was definitely the right thing to do. It was a brilliant move. And then again, I was working for them until eventually I just thought, I have to go back to transport. I cannot work for a technology company. It was great in many ways, it was fabulous, but it just wasn't me. And my business partner still works there, and she has had a brilliant career, and it was fabulous. It was the right thing to do, but for me, it was important that I went back to my, get on with it, kind of the nuts and bolts of logistics, which is really what makes me tick. And that was why I went back to working for a transport company. And then again, I thought, well, I'll keep my 1 day a week going as a self-employed person. It was at the beginning of the pandemic, so we didn't know what was going to happen. And then eventually I just reduced my number of days until eventually I had enough work to go back to being self-employed. But back to your golf buddy point, I realized very early on that really networking was my big superpower. And as you've indicated, a lot of people, once they've met me, they will remember me, and the energy and the fact that I'm a bit different, and all of those good things work in my favor. So I thought, right, well, let's capitalize on that rather than making it a disadvantage. Let's make it an advantage. So that's why I set up Women in Logistics, and why I've always made networking at the very cornerstone of my business development strategy. And, I win most of my work through networking and referrals, and people saying, oh, Ruth's a person that's really good at that, and being recognized as an expert in a fairly niche area, but being known by enough people so that when all of those people have a requirement, they will contact me. So that's really how I get my opportunities. But I have very much cut down the brambles myself on that particular path, and hopefully have laid the path for other people in doing that.
Absolutely. And I think the networking thing's really interesting. I think it's a word that's used a lot. I remember when I was at university, everyone was, setting up networking events and things like that. But sometimes it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to do. Sometimes you don't know how to, especially in an industry like haulage, where often you are all around the country. And, you might not even come across somebody whose job that you might be a little bit interested in, because they work in a completely different depot, or they work at head office that you never go to, and things like that. So, you know, CILT, for example, and there are other places, can be really useful as a place to be able to meet new people and to reach out, and then to have a really interesting career like yours, where you've worked in logistics, but across different sectors and seen the opportunities there, not kind of pure supply chain or pure logistics maybe, but in the supply chain of other industries, which I don't think is really recognized. If you get started in a 3PL, for example, you don't recognize that your skills might be useful in a completely different sector.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have recently been elected to the Worshipful Company of Carmen, and that's a place where there's a much wider representation of transport, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Carmen comes from cartmen, so it's buses, coaches, taxis, lorries. We get all different sorts of people involved with the movement of goods and people, and also a lot of military people as well. And the way that I go about networking, and I have to sort of give credit to the CILT, because they have helped me on my networking journey very much, and I think I've helped them as well, but I've learned to network at CILT events, and learned to get the benefit of networking at CILT events. And so when I joined the Carmen, I was conscious that it was giving me access to a new group of people. So if I go to CIRT event, I will often know a lot of the people there. It may be, and I've got like little techniques, tips and tricks that I use. So I will try and find a list of the people, and a good way of doing that is take a photograph of the table plan. So you can then, you've got all their names, and you're not breaching any data. You're not asking anybody for anything dodgy. It's out there, you've taken a photograph of it, and then you can, if you meet somebody, you can remember what table they were at, and you can then look back which company they work for in the booklet they give you. So use all of those things that are there for you. So the CILT, and within the Carmen, what I'm trying to do really is to widen my network, so that, for example, there's a lot of road transport lawyers within the Carmen who will come to the odd CILT event, but the CILT isn't necessarily their natural roosting place. So actually finding more lawyers within the Carmen is interesting in itself. Of course, as somebody that does road transport audits, potentially the lawyers are a source of work. They're not the people actually giving me the work, but they could, they can signpost work in my direction potentially. So getting those kind of slightly at one remove networking contacts is a very clever way of networking. And when I teach people how to network, one of the things I always say is you're not necessarily networking with the person in front of you. In fact, most of the time you're not networking with them at all. What you're trying to do is to unleash the contacts that they've got in their mind. And this is a very old-fashioned analogy, but there used to be a thing called the Rolodex, which was this sort of very old-fashioned. It was even old-fashioned when I started work, but it was a big sort of circle, and it had people's cards in it, and you rolled it round until you got to Z or J or whatever, and it would have the person's contact details. So you're trying to unleash the Rolodex in everybody else's head. So it might be that you're saying, "Hi Rebecca, I'm Ruth. I'm a transport and compliance consultant." I will then use questions like, "Do you know anybody that's got trucks going in and out of the gate?" So you're using that side of their mind, which is picture based. You're unleashing the Rolodex that says, actually, I've got a cousin that's got a factory and they've got lorries going in and out. So I'm not necessarily trying to get at you. I'm trying to think, who do you know who would help me? And that's where people go wrong, I think, with networking, is that they think they've got a network with that person, and actually that's not. You're just trying to find those synaptic links so that they go, oh, actually I could put you in touch with my friend Jeff, and I know Jeff buys some lorries and he's got some horse boxes, and and then suddenly you're off and you've got something to talk about, and and also then you can move on, because networking, people do get stuck talking to somebody, and you can move on. You can be perfectly polite and move around the room, and I will do that a lot, so that's one of the things I say.
I mean, you're quite established now, very established, but I mean, you've recently joined the Carmen, and that must be a new experience. But for people coming in who are maybe in the beginning of stages of their career, or they've transitioned slightly, or they're in a room full of people who they don't feel as established, have you ever suffered from imposter syndrome? How do you work through that?
I have never had imposter syndrome.
I am
I think I'm
jealous.
the only person in the world
Stop
ever to say that.
it.
And I think there's a reason for that, which is that my brother, who's called Rob, he's quite badly disabled, and he uses his feet to do everything. So when I was little, we're within a year of each other. When I was little, I knew that I was the one that could do stuff. I knew that I was the one that was, the lucky one, because I was not disabled. So actually, that and I know that's a unique set of circumstances, which has meant it's easier for me to sort of feel that I am in, I feel that everywhere I am, I'm meant to be. I have no sense that I have, kind of. I don't know, I just don't suffer from imposter syndrome. I don't feel guilt about anything either, so maybe that's a bit weird. But I just think, yeah, I'm where I'm meant to be, and I am the lucky one. So it's kind of not just my, it's almost like my responsibility to make the most of all the opportunities that come to me. So I kind of turn it on its head, rather than feeling like an imposter. I kind of turn it into I'm in this situation. I've been incredibly fortunate to get here. What can I do with it? How can I help
I
other
like that.
people? And so it kind of, yeah, I have, it's just a weird thing, and I don't know why. But yeah, no imposter syndrome. I just feel, I work really hard. I work really hard at school. I work really hard all the time, and I deserve my success. And I don't feel there's anything bad in that. And I think one of the things that I feel if as a gift that I could give, particularly to younger women or women coming through, is the gift of confidence. And I feel this is the biggest thing that holds everybody back. And I have suffered quite a lot with my own lack of confidence, but to do with my appearance, not to do with my ability, which is really interesting. And yeah, so I think if you can, and it's a hackneyed old phrase, I know, but fake it till you make it, and use that, turn that imposter syndrome round to, I'm in this position, what can I do with it? How can I make this better for me and for everybody else? Not feeling this crippling sense of, I'm an imposter, therefore I'm going to get found out. Actually, the other way around is, I can do something incredible with this opportunity and help other people. I think that's probably the way to look at that.
Absolutely. And I think what I've realised since joining the Next Generation Committee is that actually having somebody younger who we might not think we have enough experience to contribute to conversations or to have our ideas have value, but a lot of the other forums in the CILT who might be run and led by much more established people are keen to get next generation input or representation
Yeah.
at their events, because they want to see the future of the industry go forward. They want to see what we think, having grown up in a completely different set of circumstances, might find a value as a customer, might find different to how they think, and how our experience have shaped our ideas just as much as their experiences have shaped theirs, but in kind of more of a present time. I grew up, I can barely remember when you couldn't use the phone and the internet at the same time. Like, that is a distant memory. And
Yeah.
if something doesn't offer next day delivery, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
So we have grown up with a different set of circumstances, and our view of what the future holds might be quite different, because what the future held for previous generations is here now and may still be surprising and seem like a big innovation, whereas now you have school children learning AI and how to code.
Yeah.
And that's the norm. So what's their future? What's their big ideas?
Yes. Yeah.
Because
I
they
think
might be so much bigger.
what's really important to remember in that, for anybody that's a young person thinking, I have nothing to contribute, I don't know enough because there's all these people here who know loads of stuff. Actually, we're in a war for talent. And, you know, if logistics is going to survive, we need to get the best people in. And the best people will probably be young people. So if we don't understand how their minds work or how they tick or what makes them go, oh, wow, this is a great company to work for, we're not going to be that great company to work for. So actually not listening to young people is, you know, a kind of ridiculous way of going about things. And young people almost owe it to themselves and the generation coming after them that they do have something to say. They have got something to you know, your point of view as a young person is incredibly valuable. Now, it might be that the older people think, you know, oh, that's just, you know, millennials. And, you know, there is that kind of generational split between people saying, oh, you know, young people want to work from home and, you know, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. But actually, that is the reality. And if that's how that young people feel, you know, ignoring it isn't going to help. We've got to adapt. As a sector, as a profession, we have to adapt to what young people want. Otherwise, they will go and work somewhere else, and that's not going to help logistics. So I think, you know, as a call to arms for people watching this video, you know, make sure that you do speak up, make sure that you do contribute, because actually, you know, it's vital that we understand how your minds work and how you tick. Otherwise, as an industry, we're going to be extinct.
Absolutely. Now, I have a question I really wanted to ask you, tapping into your compliance knowledge specifically and thinking about the future. Obviously, we have a general election coming up, and there's a strong possibility it might be a Labour government for the first time in quite a few years. What kind of initiatives would you want to see? They obviously have a lot in their policies at the moment about the Clean Air Act, or proposed Clean Air Act, a lot about public transport and the environment. But what about kind of in haulage and compliance around that? Would you like to see come into place in order to spur the industry onwards?
I think one of the big things is clarity. One of the worst things in politics is when you don't really know what's going to happen. So this 5-year cycle is incredibly difficult if you're trying to plan environmental changes. You know, I listen to podcasts called The Rest is Politics, and they talk about this a lot. That, you know, this 5-year cycle is okay up to a point, but if you're trying to have some sort of strategy, you know, that we're actually going to genuinely save the world, then actually a 5-year cycle isn't really helpful. So I think one of the biggest issues that we've had in transport is lack of clarity or perceived clarity, and then people changing their minds, like the 2035 change with electric vehicles and the ZEV mandate, which has been extremely unhelpful. So I think clarity on things like that. I think clarity on when the internal combustion engine specifically will become extinct for large good HGVs, heavy goods vehicles. I think clarity on the things like whether there's going to be any changes to health and safety legislation. So we have in Great Britain, we have the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, which actually came in before when we became part of the EC, so that's British legislation. But the EU regs that have come in since then, particularly the sort of six-pack in 92 and subsequent legislation, there's been some debate as to whether that's going to be a bonfire of the regulations because of Brexit. It would be good to know that that's not going to happen and we're not going to go back in time, you know, so clarity on things like that, and, you know, clarity on driver's hours. We've had some changes around the driver CPC. There's going to be a British driver CPC if you just want to drive within the UK. You know, we need clarity on these things because this industry does not react well to lack of clarity. That's one of the biggest frustrations for me. And you get jungle drums and you get people saying, oh, I don't really know what's happening. And then people won't make decisions because they think, well, I'll hang on and hang on and hang on because the law might change or they might change direction. And that is the most, you know, because they're trying to get the market to solve a massive problem. The only way that the market can solve that is actually to have genuine clarity on when on those pieces of legislation, because otherwise people won't start buying electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles because they'll just keep fingers crossed that it's never going to happen. And, working from, when you're on the other side of it, understanding the ZEV mandate, and, there's already a requirement to sell 10% of vehicles, vans, for example, now has to be 10% electric vans. Trying to get those vans sold is not easy, because people just keep thinking, well, we'll just keep, we'll just hold our breath and it'll all go away. And that's my biggest frustration with trying to effect change, is that politicians are very bad at saying something and then changing it. And then once you've done that once, people will just not make a decision. They'll say, well, we won't invest yet because we don't know when that's going to come in, or if it's going to come in. So that was my plea to the Labour government, is give clarity, but stick to your guns.
I think as well, like transport specifically, it's a very asset heavy and a very people heavy industry, and
Yeah.
neither are very easy to change quickly.
Yes.
It is a dynamic industry in terms of solutions, in terms of ideas, but actually changing your assets and actually changing the behavior of a large amount of people can be really difficult to do, especially when you're going backwards and forwards based on the legislation that's coming out and then coming back again and then being changed. And so I think, the clarity would be very helpful for companies who are looking, further than a 4-year term and wanting to, invest in the future, knowing that that financial expenditure is going to help them and be in the right direction.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so hopefully we can see something around that. Especially, I mean, I was at DAF recently at the headquarters in the UK, and they were talking about electric vehicles and electric units, and how everybody is very interested in the environment and very interested in electric vehicles, but nobody is putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly.
Because there's no incentive to. And the presenter talked about the carrot and the stick. So you need both. You need the carrot, which is grants and investment from the government, which we've seen a small amount of, and hopefully we'll see more in the future. But also the stick in terms of regulations, where where companies have to abide by that, but giving them the tools, and the help to get there. And we look at, the changes that are going to be happening in London coming in. I think it's in October, and how can we make sure that those changes that make the safety better and the air quality better are going to be easy to accomplish without a huge expenditure from companies, and without then affecting the supply chain into London, which then, affects the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it will be interesting to see what Labour come out with in their manifesto. I know their policies kind of guidance is on their website now, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to be able to speak to the shadow transport secretary. She is my local MP, so I'm going to play that angle, watch this space.
Yeah.
And I will share anything that she tells me with you.
Thank you. I think the answer is not very much. My experience is politicians speak, but they don't necessarily say an awful lot. So
yeah, they can be difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I did want to end on a bit of a career advice note. So what would be, if you could only give one single piece of advice to your younger self in 1989 entering the business, what would that be? What would you want somebody to go into logistics knowing?
I mean, at a very basic level, it's going to be okay. That's really what I would say to myself. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be an easy career to be in, but it's going to be amazing. And ultimately, you will be able to be yourself. That's what I really wish that I had known then, because I would have saved myself so much anxiety and, kind of worrying about stuff, and just I was quite an anxious person when I was younger about doing the right thing, and I think if I'd known then that I'm going to emerge now as the person that I am, and having been able to deploy sorry, the personality and to create women in logistics and do all the amazing stuff that I've done, I think that would have just put my mind at rest a bit, that I was gonna, I think I was just very anxious about things. And yeah, I think that's probably but that's a very personal thing. I think probably for everybody, it's the believe in yourself. I think we're all, particularly more so now, crippled by worrying about what we look like, worrying about how other people perceive us, and it doesn't serve your higher purpose. It's just accept what you look like and make the best of yourself, but don't get anxious, and as far as you can within the confines of the industry you work in, do be yourself. That's the best gift that you've got, 'cause, again, it's an old cliche, but we are there's only one you, isn't there? So you can bring so much more being yourself than trying to be somebody else. And if you're a woman, don't try to be a man. I think that's another thing that I probably went a bit wrong on. But it was all I was trying to do something really difficult at a really difficult time, and it's worked out okay. But I have to say, it's been tough, but it's been amazing.
I'm so glad. And I think that it's really important for people to understand that you can talk about things like this, and there will always be somebody who has either been through what you're struggling with at the moment or is currently going through it. And for women, for other minorities, for men as well,
Women
reaching out.
Women are not a minority, by the way.
Not in the world, sometimes in logistics. But reaching out to somebody who understands what you're going through can be so useful, even if they're not in your specific, company, your specific role. But there's a lot of, I guess, what we call soft skills, but I think are the hardest to accomplish. That are super transferable.
I think a lot of people, particularly younger people, are maybe worried about asking for mentors, or could they have a chat with somebody? And most people are very happy to have a chat with you, but it's about having that sort of chutzpah to say, would you mind, I'd just like to have a short chat with you about my career, and whether that's a senior person, but having the bravery to say that senior person will probably think, wow, that is an incredible younger person that's prepared to do that. And I think that's the sort of thing that's quite simple but can really make the difference in careers.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I will see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Bye.
Bye.